over to you, Nigel.
Tim, thank you very much. Okay, so as Tim said, my name is Nigel Dacre. I'm the president of the Media Society. As Tim mentioned, we are recording this, so it's going to have another life on our YouTube channel. This is very much a collaboration with South College. So we're very grateful to Tim for allowing us to use this location for our recording. My background is that I've had a mixture of TV news and media, the media commercial world in general. In TV news, I was at the BBC, then I went to ITN, where I was the editor of ITV News, in charge of programmes like News at 10 and the ITN 24-hour news channel. So I'm really pleased that we got two guests to talk about our subject of the future of journalism. Let me introduce them quickly. First of all, Lucy Wasson. Lucy's an ITV News correspondent and newscaster. She was China correspondent with ITV News, reporting some of the biggest stories in the region, including the Hong Kong protests from inside North Korea. Before that, she was US correspondent for ITV Daybreak. She grew up in the Wirral, attended Manchester University and has a postgraduate degree in journalism from the University of Lancashire. We're also pleased to have Sebastian Payne with us, who's a Times leader writer and columnist, and actually came to Durham University, so as an alumnus of Durham University. Before the Times, Sebastian, you worked at the Financial Times, the Spectator, and the Telegraph. You've also written 2 books, which is no small achievement. You grew up in Gateshead, just quite to here, and you did a computer science degree here at Durham. So look, let's start off by just asking you both to describe what you do in your jobs. So you're both journalists, but in quite different worlds. One in television news, one in newspapers. So Lucy, do you want to start about describing more about your role?
Yeah, so as Nigel says, so essentially my job title is senior correspondent. I joined ITN 11 years ago now, and it was as China correspondent. So my immediate posting was out in Beijing, and that was running the bureau out in Beijing, the cameras, the producers, and essentially deciding what stories that we wanted to cover with a bit of direction from London. But essentially, I had the autonomy, and that was how it began. And then, different things happened in life. I had children. I came back, and I am now a senior correspondent based essentially in London, but now get deployed as and when something happens. I mean, I'm on the train on the way up here and I get a phone call, will you go to Calais, Lucy, on Sunday, because the UK's latest figures on migration are out. So they want somebody there where people are leaving the coast, the French coast, and coming over to the UK in small boats. And I did it at the end of September, we did it. So they want me to do it again because I did a decent job. And that is essentially what life is like. I don't know from one day to the next what I'm going to be doing. So that's the role of a correspondent. As Nigel also mentioned, I newscast for them as well. So I present the lunchtime news and weekend news, evening and 10 o'clock news, relatively regularly, I suppose, once, twice a week, sometimes more. And that is a completely different kettle of fish and a completely different type of skill set, if I'm honest. I mean, you still get the adrenaline surge as you do when you're live reporting, but it's a totally different skill set because, as the name suggests, you have to anchor that show and the audience has to think that everything is calm and easy. And it is not, generally, because someone is giving you instructions in your ear, talking to you, telling you timings. So that is a totally different experience. I also see, this is the future of journalism, by the way, you have to be a pluralist. You have to be able to do everything. So I also present our podcast, one of our podcasts, which is called What You Need to Know. And now in my own time, I've started to broadcast on TikTok, I do a Substack, I'm on Instagram. So all of these things, we'll talk about it much more in depth as we progress throughout the evening. But that is my role now. I do all these different bits and bobs.
As a follow-up then, you my career, I was editor of Lunchtime News, and I still look back on it as being the most stressful job I did.
Lunchtime especially, actually.
Often the reports would come in during the programme, there'd be breaking news. So talk more about the kind of stresses of the presenting a live programme like that.
Okay, so maybe I will give you a particular example. So very recently I was on, it's not what didn't happen in lunchtime, but it did happen in at the weekend. So when there was the dreadful attack a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday night on the train in Huntingdon. So I went in at, my shift when I'm presenting later in the news, you don't go until the afternoon. Someone else does the morning bulletin. So I'm then there to do evening news and 10 o'clock news. And when we went on air, I went into the studio, everything was as normal. We were expecting the lead package to come in from our UK editor, who doesn't normally work a weekend because it was a story of huge magnitude. He came in, he went to Huntingdon to do it. So he's out news gathering, it's called, getting interviews, getting footage all day out there. Then we had another reporter there and another reporter there because, again, it was such a big story. And we went in, so the director is talking to me in my ear, and I can see in the computer in front of me, so you can see what's landed on the server, if you like, and what hasn't. And the lead package, so the big report that is going to lead the programme, is still offline. So it's not arrived in the building yet. And it is quite literally 1 minute until you would see my face on the telly. And that I've got nothing to go to. I've got nothing I can read to you, but I can't go to a report at all. So that was happening. And then I thought, well, okay, maybe we'll just go straight live to Paul instead, and that will be an option. And then I can see in the plasma screen next to me the shot, but no Paul. So I'm thinking, right, well, that's not going to be an option either. So the programme editor, because all hell is breaking loose in the actual newsroom, he hasn't come into what's called the gallery, which is where you see all the screens and all the instructions are coming in. And he hasn't, so there is nobody to give me any instruction about what they want to do with this programme. And we're now 30 seconds to when I loom up on your television screens with no plan. So then the director's just like, what do you want to do, Lucy? And I'm like, right, we'll go to Sam's package, which is the next package, which is still related to the story, but it's not kind of the sequence of events of the day. It is more going to it's more of a people piece, we call it, and we've spoken directly to an eyewitness or something like that. So it's not ideal that because it's the second piece, it's not ideal that it comes first, but it's something. So we have to go with what we've got. And then similarly, Sam was ready, so we could do Sam live. So I'm obviously looking at the camera, reading the top story, but then what I would have said and what is written in front of me on the camera, the auto cue, is Paul Brand has our top report, or Paul has been at the scene all day. And I know full well as I'm reading it, no, that's not Paul's report. So you're looking, you're watching, but what's coming out of my mouth is then Sam Holder has the top story. And then the director knows, great, play Sam's report. And then we know that we've got 2 minutes whilst you're seeing that report to scramble to make the next plan. So the only way, and what's one of my fellow presenters said to me once, the very first time I ever presented lunchtime news, she said to me, her biggest advice was, deal with what's in front of you, not what's to come, what's not there next. You literally deal with second by second. Okay, that's there, we go with that. That's there, we go with that. Oh, that's not there. Okay, what's next? So your brain goes crackers. And it's why I always cycle home after a presenting shift, because the adrenaline surge is huge. But you just deal with things in front of you. So that kind of answers the question.
It's stressful.
It's stressful, isn't it? I'm reliving it for you, don't worry.
Back all these memories. Right, TV to newspapers. Talk about your job then, Sebastian.
It's a bit less stressful than that. So I've worked in newspapers for about 15 years now, with 2 years off, running a think tank, which was about doing politics and policies. For the purpose of this, I'll just ignore that entirely. So my current job at the Times is what's known as a leader writer, which is a kind of slightly odd thing when you think about what newspapers do. You look at what you do, and it's something people can see and identify with. Being a leader writer is like being a speechwriter for the editor and the anonymous being that is the newspaper. And you're trying to sum up whatever the paper is going to think about the news events of the day. So a typical day for me is that we will have a meeting in the office at about 11 o'clock, which will be myself, my colleague Neil, who's a fellow leader writer, and the editor of the paper, deputy editor of the paper. And essentially the editor will normally walk in and say, what are we going to write about today? And Neil and myself will say, well, I think today we'll write about Rachel Reeves, the budget, and all the turbulence we've seen in the market. And the editor will normally give a sort of slight nod that suggests, yes, I think that's a good idea. And at that point, someone will then set out a pitch on what they think about it. Now, most of the time, it's broadly consensus in terms of what people are trying to get to. Some days, though, is a massive argument when you have a big area of disagreement between people, and whoever is going to write that leader has to basically take down all these notes and try and come to some kind of conclusion that you can knit into 680 words, and that will sum up all the arguments and all the view. And the key thing to note in this is that whatever the editor says, you basically just go with that and ignore everyone else. That is the best way to have a very easy life. So, if there's someone else, you think, oh, well, that's an interesting point. But if it runs counter to what Tony Gallagher, who's editor of the Times, or Maggie O'Regan, who's our deputy editor, say, then you just go with them, basically. So we have 3 leaders we do a day, which are the top one, which will normally be the primary domestic politics or policy story of the day, broadly speaking. We have the secondary one, which will be normally something that's foreign affairs related. And then we have the funny third, which is meant to make people laugh when they read that one. And depending on how funny it is, you can take different views on that. The reader's comment suggests that not many of them have a great sense of humour. So we do those every day, and then you go off and you write them, and then you try and make sure it's accurate, that it reflects the view. And we try and keep Times editorials to be fair and balanced, but also pacey and actually say something. And the analogy I often use with colleagues is that when they talk about the US Senate versus the House of Representatives, the House of Representatives was seen as this kind of febrile debating atmosphere, whereas the Senate was seen as the saucer in the teacup that people would pour their tea in to cool it down, to calm the passions of the House of Representatives. That's how I try to see Times editorials are, that we're trying to take, and not a kind of big strident punch in the face, but maybe a kind of just, here's what we think. We've gone through the various arguments. I'm going to try and advance our views. So that is how leaders work in that day. And then obviously, if the editor doesn't like it, he will change it. Thankfully, that's never really happened to me. If it did, I probably wouldn't be in a job for that much longer. But, you've got to have a sense of what he wants to see. And the key thing about leaders is that they are very closely read by senior politicians of the day. So you'll know that Downing Street will read them, the leader of the opposition will read them, cabinet ministers will read them, and if they disagree with them, you will hear from them. So the Times has taken a view that is quite opposed to Bridget Phillips in the education sector, a lot of her reforms, because we don't agree with them in terms of what she's trying to achieve there. And I have, I'd say, mostly a sort of weekly exchange with various people in and around her about what she thinks about that. But we've actually just stopped doing that now, to be honest, because we're sort of so far apart where it goes to. But the key thing is you've got to be accurate. You've got to make sure it's fair. And at the end of the day, we're thinking about our readers, so who your average Times reader is, who's basically a kind of a couple who live in the southeast of England, who are probably working in professional services, who are probably reading it on the app, because that's where most of our readers are. And they, and you're thinking, and we do quite frequent focus groups and polling between our readers, so you can know what they feel about that. So that's what Leader IT is. And I also, on top of that, do a fortnightly column where I write whatever I think about things. And that one's much more straightforward. I basically just think about what do I care about and what am I going to say and write about it. So I wrote this week about a think tank called the Resolution Foundation, which is very influential in Westminster. It started in 2005, and I basically highlighted that, from my view, their focus on inequality over growth is something that's actually become problematic when it comes to budgets, because every time a chancellor looks at doing a tax cut or something like that, they're thinking about how's it going to look when the Resolution Foundation see how fair this is. Now, obviously, they will argue they've done a lot of very good work on trying to make sure that the government's policies help the poorest, which is a great thing. But I argued in my column this week that actually it's having a negative effect on the whole economy. So that's kind of how the column writing and leader writing works. I can talk a bit about when I was a political reporter and how that worked and all that stuff in the past. But to your point about being multi-talented, it's exactly the same at the time.
I said multi-skilled, and you say talented.
Words how you can.
I'm trying my best.
So the Times actually has a radio station as well called Times Radio, and that is something that broadcasts sort of 18 hours a day, and basically all Times journalists have to appear on that. Now,
Oh, do they? I didn't know
when
that.
I was at the Times, I used to get paid to appear on it. Now I don't get paid to appear on it. But yeah, so we have a radio station that's just like Radio 4, and they call it the voice of the Times. So the idea is to bring lots of people in. And, you know, for example, they have segments on obituaries, one of our most popular sections of the paper, where the obit editors talk about that. You get people like me giving their views on politics. You get our reporters come on, and that has about 650,000 listeners a week.
That's a lot, isn't it?
Huge following
Yeah.
online as well. You're very good. You guys know that someone. So we do all that as well. And then also, final thing about is video. Now, video in newspapers is a funny one because, on one sense, they're desperate to try and compete with broadcasters and the massive audience there. On the other hand, it's really hard to do video well. So when I was at the Financial Times, we had all sorts of different innovations. We did short videos. We did chatty videos, we did debating videos, we did feature-length packages, all of them rifling through different teams and different money to different degrees of success. And at the Times, we are focused, going back to your TikTok point, on Instagram, because the Times has got 1 million followers on Instagram.
Great.
And the idea is to use that to do short, sharp videos that try and captures the authority and the reporting of the Times on that kind of format. With trying TikTok, I mean, The Sun has something like 4 times the amount of TikTok followers the Times does, which kind of tells you where it at. So it's all those kind of things at once as well.
We'll come back to the video later. On the lead, I always used to say with News 10 running orders, I'd write a much better running order during the night and the next day than I did before the programme went away. So how much do you, in the night or the next day, think, oh, I wish I'd thought that or said that, or do you have great sort of certainty and confidence? How often do you sort of look back and think,
Yeah, I mean, probably quite a lot. The thing is, you know, and I know this is a very trite quote, but it's the Philip Graham thing. Journalism is the first draft of history.
Yeah.
You are basically, we will keep coming back to the same topics. So I looked, and I think this week I've written 3 or 4 editorials about the economy and various views. So if I forget something, I can just come back and do again a couple of days later, is where I sort of try and think about it. But my news consumption is, I sort of wake up in the morning, there's an email called Political Playbook, which gives you kind of very good summary of what's going on in Westminster. Start with that. I flip between Times Radio and Radio 4 as I'm getting ready. I get into the office and I'll kind of have a look at what the other papers have said. So I normally look at the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Mail, the FT, in terms of their editorial columns, what they've said on stuff. Columnists that I like as well. So by the time we get to our meeting, which is quite late in the day actually, at 11 a.m, because the Times, everything's moved forward massively of late, because it used to be still everything was done from about 6 p.m. onwards. Now everything's online, folks. That's our audiences in the morning. It's done much earlier. So by the time I get to the leader meeting, I kind of feel as if we know what's coming on the news list. We know what the views are. We know what we've said before. And I talk to colleagues as well. So there'll be on the little comment section of the Times newsroom, you'll have some of our columnists who are often like Fraser Nelson, Danny Finkelstein, Jenny Russell, Alice Thompson. These are all people who write regular columns for the Times. And they're all fantastically clever and expert in certain areas. So for example, Fraser Nelson is very expert on welfare reform and has done Channel 4 documentaries on it. Danny Finkelstein is very good on cultural issues, for example. So if there's something about that, I would say, Fraser, what do you think about X? What do you think we should say? And so when you go and you try and have a pitch, but I'd say there's very few days where I think we've got this wrong, because we do have a good discussion. There are some days though where you do have to bin it and start all over again if there's a big news development. And the latest I've done that is, so I'm meant to get the page done with the 3 leaders, will be done about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. The latest I've binned one started again entirely was 5:45. I did it in 45 minutes when there was some very late breaking news, which was Prince Andrew losing his title. So when that came through at 5 o'clock, we had to bin the whole thing and start all over again. And it was obviously a huge thing. This never happened before. I'm not saying we didn't know what we were talking about, but we then had to decide what our view is. This a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Does this go far enough? And we basically decided in a sort of 5-minute judgment, this is good, but it doesn't go far enough. And it's just a kind of symbol. And it was ultimately proven right, because they had to come back 2 weeks more and do some more.
Indeed. Okay. Listen, what a fascinating insight into your jobs in newspapers and TV news. Let's go back now about why you wanted to go into journalism, what drove that, and how did you get your first job? But Lucy, do you want to start?
I get asked this a lot. I chat in schools quite often, and if there's nothing grandiose about why I wanted to be a journalist. It was, I'm incredibly nosy. I love a good chat, and I am incredibly curious about other people, other people's lives, and different parts of the world. It was just quite that simple for me. And this job gives you access to incredible people, stories and experiences that they've had and you have through them, that never in a million years did I ever think that I would bear witness to, I would hear, I would share. And I've been to parts of the world that I didn't even know existed when I was at school, let alone ever think that I would go to. So that I mean, it's quite.
And you
fun.
decided after university to go into an MA in.
Yeah, I did. So it was a postgrad, first of all, and then an MA, because I made it into a bit of a tele-documentary about other job. So my first job was at Century FM in Manchester.
Okay.
And I did have the choice at the time to freelance for the BBC. When I did my postgrad, I could freelance for the BBC and work maybe 1 or 2 shifts a week, or, which was better money, or I could have a full-time job working for a commercial radio station 5 days a week. And I think my salary was £12,000 a year. But that was doing the job day in, day out. And I was hungry to get better, quicker, faster, and crack on. And so I did that. And it was the best experience, because the BBC, and this was up north, this was in Manchester, is an enormous organisation. They do have a lot of resource at every stage of it. And for me, it was working for commercial organisations, and hence why that sounds a negative, but I went to ITV and not the BBC, was because you're fighting for space more, I suppose, and your chance on air, or your chance to show yourself more in an organisation like the BBC when I was at a very junior level. And whereas in a commercial broadcaster, radio station or television, it was a case of you thrown an opportunity because they don't have the people, and you either sink or swim, and I did a lot of swimming. So
Well, that's you see, you're probably genuinely hungry too.
I'm always hungry.
Sebastian, so you did quite a different degree, computer science?
Yeah, so I did computer science at Durham because I was told by a tutor at school to do something that might actually get you a job one day, which was actually from the best advice thing I've ever had. So I did that, but while I was at Durham, I did Purple Radio, where I was station manager for a year, and then Platina, where I was bizarrely music editor amongst other things, but was kind of involved in that. And I'd got to the end of university, and for me, it was mostly about the political lens. I was fascinated by politics. This was at the time, 2010 election, and Durham, amazingly, was a hive of political activity because it was a marginal seat between Labour and the Liberal Democrats, if you can imagine that back then, because this was pre-tuition fees, and the Lib Dems came within 500 votes of winning the city of Durham. And we had everyone. I think you had both Miliband, Vince Cable, Nick Clegg, all the big hitters relatively came to Durham at that point. So that kind of really sparked an interest in politics in me at that point. I did an MA as well at City University into investigative journalism, and I'd done that because it struck me as a very interesting thing to look at things in a bit more in-depth way, which I've tried to continue doing for the journalism I've done since then. And so I did that MA, and I basically saw it as a way of not being academic, but it was just trying to get as much experience as possible. So I was there in London, and while I was, I did everything I possibly could to try and, as you were saying, get your foot in the door. And I did work experience at The Guardian, on the Media Guardian desk, which was fascinating. I loved that. And the Media Guardian used to have this big supplement. They used to print lots of media stuff, and it was a really interesting way to learn about that. But the break that I got was very lucky, was at the Telegraph at that point. The Telegraph was very into what's now known in journalism as data visualization. This was the very early days of this. And I managed to get in to do 6 weeks of unpaid, obviously, work experience, about helping them with data visualization. Because I'd done computer science and could do a lot of data and statistic manipulation very easily, I found a niche that was very good and there was a way in. And at the end of it, I got offered a job on a pensions magazine, which is where a lot of people start. And basically, the Telegraph took on this. Well, okay, we'll give you a job. So I got this job, which had the very lovely title Data Graphics Reporter, which is really as exciting as it sounds, which I managed to take the word graphics out of it. So it was basically data reporter. You should just basically sift through data sets to try and find stories, do FOIs, do all this kind of stuff. And I was there for about a year before I then went off to The Spectator, where I was there for quite a much longer time, involved in the big digital transition. And The Spectator was the place where I really kind of properly learned how to be a journalist, because very small. It was only 12 people on the editorial staff, a lot of outside contributors, and the editor was Fraser Nelson, who was again very good journalist and was very good at bashing to shape in terms of how to write, how to do political journalism. So it was that point I kind of was very lucky about how to get there. But I think the thing is to your point, you've got to just really keep going and going and going, because the supply and demand is so out of kilter for journalism. There's so much more demand and there are supply of places, and the competition is fierce. So you've got to people who say, how is it to get in? You've just got to really keep on pushing until you get there and you find your niche.
Okay. Again, we'll come back to sort of advice for people later. But the passion that you both have is clearly coming across. Just what I want to get to quickly before we move on is that I think it's really interesting. We have completely two different types of journalists here, don't we? So at ITV News, you are meant to be impartial. The very famous editor David Nicholas used to say that when you joined ITN, you'd had to have an opinionectomy. So and for years I worked with people like Trevor McDonald, and I genuinely don't know how he voted, and we didn't really have a strong opinion on the issues of the day. It was more how we were going to report it. But in your side, and interestingly, you've actually stood for Parliament.
Attempted and failed.
Well, it's a very different skill, journalism, where your job, you have to be, and what's really crucial, you've got it accurate though, haven't you, and truthful and the rest of it. But nevertheless, your job is to be paid to have opinions.
Yes.
And so it's interesting how I think for the audience that we've got two different types of journalism.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, when I was a political reporter for the Financial Times in the lobby, that was not an opinionated job. It was very much more in the style of what you've talked about. And the FT in particular takes its impartiality and the seriousness of its reporting very, very strongly, because it can affect markets, as we've seen literally today. That the FT's report last night on the Chancellor changing her view on income tax has massively affected the cost of government borrowing based on that one news story. And the FT pays a lot of store on being correct and accurate on that kind of thing. What I do now at the Times is, you've kind of summed it very well, Nigel, is that I have a worldview. It's very similar to the Times worldview. I don't agree with everything, but it's like a Venn diagram of stuff as well. But what we're not trying to do is just be ranty. And I mean, particularly in the age of X, anyone could have an opinion and anyone could find a platform for that opinion. So if we're going to offer opinion in the Times, then it needs to have extra value. So ideally well written, ideally accurate, ideally, persuasive in terms of what you do there. So it is very different, but then and comment at the Times is slightly segregated from the rest of the newsroom, in the sense that we talk to the reporters, we know they are, the news editors come into the discussions we have about leaders, but people who write comment generally don't also write for the news.
And it's for signposting to the readers that this is comment,
yes,
and this is an article which is expected to be.
I found it's almost, because it's so ingrained within me not to have an opinion. I feel like I've got to the age of 45 and I'm in, at a dinner party, and it says, well, what do you really think, Lucy? And I almost don't know, because I'm so used to playing it straight down the middle and genuinely saying it from both sides.
I think that's really, I was the same when I was editor of ITV News. People would say, well, what do you think about this? And I'd have to think, well, no, on the one hand this, on the other hand that.
And also nervous, genuinely. I'm nervous about spouting my opinion on certain things.
Okay, look, let's move on. I think the area of journalism has gone through incredible changes in the last 20 years, and both of you have touched on this. So that 20 or so years ago, it would be quite normal that you had one job. You had to write an article, and then a separate team would put the newspaper to bed, likewise in TV. But both of you already said you both do podcasts, you do Substack. We were discussing about your TikTok earlier. You've got a big following on Instagram. So the role of journalism, I mean, I would say it's multi-skilled. I think that was the phrase we were using earlier. So as a journalist, you've just got to be able to do so much more now, don't you?
Yeah.
And presumably that's just going to happen more and more. So even the last 6 months, you've started a Substack, for instance. So do you want to talk about the kind of breadth of job and also the pressure it puts you on, because you finish your column, don't you, or your leader item, and then you've got to go and do something else, and then you've got to go appear in your podcast. So it's a bit relentless, is it not? Sebastian, do you want to start talking about that?
Yeah, I mean, because I started in newspapers in 2011 was my first job. And that felt like the end of an era of which was very much a siloed print era. So back then, newspapers, the primary product was still the newspaper. The Times does not have any meetings now that are just about the newspaper, because out of our audience, which is about, I think it's 650,000, no, so it's 750,000 in total, about 600,000 of that of subscribers is all digital. So that's our primary audience now. And the way you package things, the way you do things for digital is obviously different. But then I think on the pressures point of view, this particularly when I was in the Parliamentary Press Gallery, the lobby, as it's known for political journalists, it was fascinating seeing different papers and how they do that. You know, so for example, the Daily Telegraph was very big on live blogging, which is basically just never stops the whole day. You're just kind of constantly filing stuff that at some point you have to stop and then write something for the paper / the website, which is, you know, great for the readers, but it's very hard to have perspective. It's also much easier to make mistakes when you have that as well. But I think I've always thought it's a good thing that you're doing more and you're reaching a bigger audience, because ultimately why are we doing all this is to try and tell the stories, in my case, to have the arguments with as broad a section of people as possible. And that requires reaching as many people as possible. And you've got to go where the audience is. You know, the fact is, print newspapers have been in long-term decline, and that's not going to be reversed. It's not as sharp as some people thought. You know, I think the Times will still be printing in 10, 20 years' time, but it will just become a smaller and smaller part of what we do as an offering. All our audience is online. So that's where all the focus is. Same with, you know, the fact that Times started a radio station is because there was clearly an appetite to have that extra product. And same with YouTube and Twitter as well, and all the rest of it. It's just about trying to think about where you get to people. I think you just got to, it's the point about perspective, I think, is key, right? And remembering what the values of your, so ITV is obviously all about trusted, independent reporting. That's where you get the focus on that thing.
From my perspective, I mean, I've written here in my notes, there are just so many beasts to feed now, essentially. As Nigel said, that, you know, ITV has 3 traditional news programmes. You've got your lunchtime news at 1:30, then you've got evening at 6:30, and then 10. And that, when I first joined, was all I had to feed and worry about. And even then, I'd be like, oh no, I haven't got time to do a lunchtime live if I've got to do all this news gathering to make 2 reports for the evening programmes. Then it was, you know, creeping in about writing an article for online, and that would be as busy as my day, you know, might potentially be. And now it's like, now I edited a piece, and then can you make an extended piece, Lucy, for ITVX? Have you done anything on TikTok? Oh, can you go and do a podcast on it, what you need to know, and talk to the presenter about that for video? And so you are quite literally pulled in different directions, sometimes if different rooms, or do a phone conversation with, you know, for YouTube, or do the podcast. And then there are other aspects of it, is that if ITV is very proud of a piece of original journalism that it's done, it might want you also to almost publicise that fact. And you might go on the GMB sofa in the morning, or, you know, one of our reporters was recently on Woman's Hour or on LBC. So you're talking to other organisations, other broadcasters about your story for ITV. So you are, you know, you are spread thinly to a point. But as said, you know, it's all about getting that story and reaching as many people as possible, and that's the whole reason that you're doing it, to tell people about it. And, you know, as he says, online is where we need to be. It's where you are. It's where you get your news, and you are our audience for the future. And we want to inform you, so that's where we have to go. We have to go wherever you are.
I think one thing I'd say just to add on that is that the thing that's often underestimated is how much effort broadcast takes compared to print. Like
TV is the greediest of them all. Basically, it takes so many people to make a piece of television, and it's gone. it's on for 2 minutes during a and then it's just gone. Whereas we do something for Instagram, we do something for TikTok, we do something for YouTube, and it lives on and has much more power as a result.
And when you're when you're doing a newspaper article, it is just me sitting there tapping away, smiling into the middle distance. Whereas when you're doing this, you've got your producers, you've got your cameramen, you've got your soundmen, you've got the editors, before you even get to the layer above that as well. And I think in newspapers, there's obviously most papers are, the Times has about 650 journalists employed, which is still pretty big in terms of newspapers, but the overall staffing will have been much less than it was 10, 20 years ago, because things have been automated, things have got faster, but it's a very different medium in terms of how you tell stories and the effort required for them.
Okay. Listen, I would ask you soon about the future of journalism and artificial intelligence, because that's quite a big area to cover. But let me open it up now, where there's any questions from any of you about for our audience, for our speakers.
Ask something. So I am a former journalist, former regional reporter, and I wonder what you feel the value of regional news has now. You're talking very much about national and global stories. Do you still feel regional news has a future?
When I first joined ITV, I worked for a regional news programme. I worked for ITV Central, which is the centre of the country and in the Midlands. And at that point, the year I joined was when ITV went from having 18 regional news programmes and operations around the country to 9. So it halved at the time. And it was a case of, if you want to work in telly, if you want to get into, you need to get into a region now, to get that experience before, progressing. That hasn't changed though. That hasn't reduced further. That is still the same. It is still 9. And people care about what is next door to them, what is in their environment. And so I don't think I don't know what the powers that be at ITV, I don't have that insight, but I think it is remiss if big companies underestimate the importance of regional news and how valuable it is for the people living in specific regions, specific areas. They care about what's on their doorstep.
And I think with print regional, the first newsroom event was the Newcastle Evening Chronicle, Newcastle Journal as well, which are both papers that were very mighty back in the day, but have now struggled with, cuts and circulation decline, all the rest of it. The only thing I would say is there has been quite a recent rise in online specialised local publications. So in London, there's a thing called, because obviously the Evening Standard has basically finished in London as a daily newspaper, which is kind of incredible. The Global just doesn't really have a daily newspaper, but there's this brilliant product called London Centric that a friend of mine started that's already become a very successful endeavour. There's similar things in Manchester. The Manchester Mill is one, the Liverpool Post, and you know what I'm talking about. So I think that
I can hurt them.
yeah, exactly. So there's clearly still an appetite, an audience there. And I agree entirely that the stories that always have the most power are the ones that either are relatable to people's lives and are rooted in people's communities. The stuff that I think when it's done from a kind of bird's eye view is never very good. So I think the audience still that. I think the business model is a problem though, and you see this in America massively, where America's never really had national newspapers. It's had newspapers based around cities in particular. And even the city papers are really struggling. Big titles like the Los Angeles Times, the Dallas Morning News, the Washington Post, they're all really struggling at the moment, where it's the kind of big national ones, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, that are doing well by getting huge digital subscriptions. But that gives you a very different view if you live in Ohio or you live in Dallas, to get someone, literally thousands of miles away writing about what's seen to you. So it's sort of getting there. And also the other thing that's happened that's been quite good is Google sponsored, along with the BBC, local democracy reporters who have been very good, again, we're into those communities. But I think the flip side of this is you get a lot of Facebook. This was very true in the last 2 general elections. Facebook became the biggest news source for a lot of communities, and a lot of political candidates of all stripes found this a massive problem because stuff that was either fake news, made up news, and now we've got the whole world of deep fakes as well, were being shared online in these Facebook groups with, again, sort of no accountability.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting with the public service broadcasting model, both ITV and BBC have to carry on having regional programming. How long that continues is one of the big debates. Do you have a view on it? Have you seen a decline?
First and foremost, I think regional press, regional media is a really good training ground for
Totally.
journalists.
I mean, the principles are the same. The way I construct a news package is exactly the same when I lived in Birmingham as how I do if I go to Ukraine or go to Israel. I mean, the structure, how you structure what you want it's exactly the same.
To get to know people.
Yes.
But you've seen a decline in
Significant change, obviously.
and it's affected you personally in terms of job?
Yeah, I was made redundant from Chronicle Journal on YouTube.
No.
Yeah, I mean, my career's gone into PR and public affairs now, so not true journalism.
Okay.
I think it has really strong value still. I think it's really
I agree.
important. And I also think it feeds a lot of what becomes the national news often starts.
Has to start in some region. It's got to be.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
Both speakers are kind of IGC of like design security journalism, which I think is amazing.
I suppose it is when you've been doing it for as long as we have, maybe.
No, exactly.
But like, in terms of, this may be a fairly obvious question, but in terms of your advice to young people like aspiring to be journalists, and maybe particularly for TV because that's a slightly different remit, and what should we be doing to get into the industry, or at least to kind of build up a kind of experience?
Hey, Lucy, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. I be able to do everything. That's basically it. And I think, I mean, there are two ways of looking at it. Naturally, journalism is a possibility now for everybody, I think, and this can only be a good thing. You know, you don't need XYZ to be a journalist. What my path was, yes, I did a BA honours degree in English and French. I then went on and did my MA at the University of Central Lancashire and got that qualification. Then, I did lots of work experience, but then I got a job in local radio and I kind of steadily, it was almost like a very predictable, prosaic route. For you, that I just don't think that will be the case at all. You could develop your own skills, create your own YouTube channel tomorrow, and it be recognised and spotted, and you have millions of subscribers and be a complete brand in your own right and a success. So that is the positive, and I think that you can hear from anyone in any part of the world and hear all these voices that were not possible. And so I think that is absolutely a positive, that it's accessible as a career to anybody. Naturally, there is the negative in the fact that, there are plenty of bad actors out there. I like to think I'm a very cup half full person, that the vast majority have good intentions, but of course there are bad actors. But then who is responsible for policing that? Yes, it is the big organisations, but then if I set up my own channel, should there be a hierarchy online? So TikTok, for example, should they prioritise ITV News' content over my content? Why are they more important than me when I've got so many more people interested? Perhaps I don't at the moment, but in my content and what I'm saying than ITV has. And then is that the role of governments to be much more instructive and demanding of the social media organisations? But then who is to say who has that priority? Who should have that priority?
Okay.
It's
So that's
good.
your tips to
Follow up on that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're completely right about the democratization of the media. It's happened so much. I mean, again, this makes me sound really old now. But like when I was trying to get started, blogging's the big thing, which is, I guess, like Substack of now. And so you can just go and do stuff. And I think my main advice is, first of all, start focused. Focus on something that interests you that you don't think other people are writing about, or you think you can add value to it. So when I started writing about politics, I wrote about this party that got no coverage, that no one cared about in 2010, called UKIP, and I'm sure you know who the leader of UKIP was back there. So for my sins, I've spent about 15 years following Mr. Farage in various degrees, and so about for 2 years, I used to drive around these tiny seaside resorts in Kent and Essex as he addressed these village meetings. A lot of time I was thinking, what am I doing with my life? But then obviously here we are now, and not just that I know these people for better or worse, but also it just means I kind of understand in a much deeper way about where the whole reform thing has come from. And because I did that, and then that then extrapolated outwards into wider political reporting. Whereas if I just came along and said I want to write about the government or started doing that, people were like, well, why do I care about you? But I found that thing, you know. So for example, if I was wanting to get started in political journalism now, I'd be thinking about the Green Party and Zach Polanski, you know, fascinating character, probably the most charismatic person in politics at the moment, whether you agree with him or not. And again, massively undercovered what's going on with the Green Party. It's had this huge rise in membership. So, you know, you can go out there, go to meetings, go and listen to them, see what they're talking about, and then start writing about it on your own. So I think, and as I get to my kind of second one, which is USP, that I always think in journalism, it's a bit like the band U2, that individually they're all not very talented and not great people, but together they're somehow the kind of one of the biggest rock bands in the world. So you've got to think about what is your USP there that you can come together. Because I think, to go back to your point about the you know, the old trajectory is definitely going to be going. The Times still has a graduate trainee scheme. It's fantastic. It's unbelievably competitive to get on. I failed to get on every single grad scheme that I applied to, by the way.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so don't do that. Exactly. But with that, you know, and they send you around different papers, they send you on different departments, and it's a brilliant thing to do. The Telegraph has one as well. The Guardian has their own version, so they're great. But I think that, you know, you're talking each year 2 people on the Times versus the thousands that go through journalism, postgrads, and all the rest of it. So that's why I think it's about this specialism point that's key.
I would just like to hold my hand up and say that actually that's been the biggest mistake of my career, is that I probably, other than my experience and being China correspondent, that was for a few years, so I was a bit of an expert on that. But other than that, I would say I've been a jack of all trades and master of none, rightly or wrongly. It's just by circumstance that that's happened. And now, even now, when I write a Substack, and that's a personal Substack, to be honest, I'm acutely aware that actually having this broad reach is not necessarily why somebody wants to read my stuff. It's they want to read. People do exist, sadly, in silos now. So if they know exactly where they want to get what they want to read or what they want to watch, that is exactly what people are doing. So even as much as our YouTube channel for ITV, that needs much more focus, because it needs the individual. Because if you watch, quite often if you're watching ITV News, perhaps you just really like our consumer editor Chris Choi, or you really like Rebecca Barry and the work she's done on skinny jabs. So I think that it needs to zone, and that's who you want to watch. That's what you want to know about. You don't want to know about the rest. And I think that I should have been a bit more specialised, or maybe I'll try now, but I'm constantly being told by other people in the world of journalism, like, have a niche.
I think
And even only last week by the former editor of Elle and Vogue magazine, and she said, have a niche. She's the ex-editor of Elle magazine, and she now writes about parenting.
So both of you would still think journalism is a viable career option, something that you would encourage people to go into?
100%. It's a wonderful career. You just have to do it differently.
Yeah, exactly. I don't really feel I can ever feel I've had a day that feels like work.
No, okay.
Which I think in life is
Hard work.
Yeah, it's
but
hard.
not that's
It's
not your
it's not,
typical.
you know, exactly.
It's never boring, is it?
It's never
That
boring.
answers the
No.
question, yeah. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
So we've seen in the past couple of days about the scam in relation to the BBC and their copy.
Knew this should come up.
Do you think this is showing that the warranted out influence that political figures can have on the organization's delivery interest in? Yes, so whether or not it challenges it, it's possible for organizations to putting these in the heart of the way.
But it's such a broad issue, isn't it? And I mean, I think it'd be interesting. What is the Times view? I mean, there is a broader view that impartiality, they're finding it's so difficult in the BBC to define impartiality and follow it. My personal views, I don't think the BB's full of people going around trying to do inaccurate news, but nevertheless, it's such a complicated. Sebastian, what's your take on BBC?
So I told you about the debates we had, the Times, that we had a very long one. It was almost an hour long on this one topic. It's probably the longest that I've heard since I've been there, because it's such a contentious issue and it's so difficult. Where we landed, and which I think shares a lot of my view as well, is no, I don't think the BBC is institutionally biased, or some people have said that it is in one way or another. What I think is it's operating in a very difficult environment, because we're talking about the kind of the specialism thing as well. What's happened over the past 15, 20 years is the kind of the broad news provider model has kind of started to end, right? So, you pick up a copy of the Times and you can read about almost anything. You read about sport, you read about culture, you read about politics. That's what people do now. They will go to one outlet to look for one particular thing, or one writer or one journalist for one particular thing. So if you're a universal organization like the BBC, all these different parts of that cover, they're trying to balance so much stuff. And, if you look at the areas that were highlighted in this row, it was the nice, uncomplicated topics of Donald Trump, the Israel-Gaza conflict, and trans rights. So again, areas where there's so much debate and contention to get stuck into there. I think actually a lot of it on the BBC thing, it was about competence, and was about laxes in competence, about the errors that were made. So this infamous Panorama edit about that as well, that I don't think was because they were all sitting there thinking, how can we be as mean to Donald Trump as possible? I think it was somebody who messed up, basically, and should have had due, punishment for that being the case. I think that's what it was about in that basis. And then to the kind of wider governance point about the BBC. Look, I think the BBC is incredibly important. The first word in that, British, it's something that kind of, for me, underpins a lot of our values as a country and a lot of what is Britishness by having that. If you look at countries that don't have broadcasters like that, I think they don't lack that big central body that holds it together, which commercial things like the Times and ITV then kind of sort of come on top of that. But I think it's going to be a very bumpy period for people. It's already going to be bumpy for the next charter renewal, which is going to start now until it comes up, completes in time for 2028. But I think ultimately it needs to take seriously the kind of the concerns that have been expressed about the accuracy. So that's my kind of point on competence. I think its management needs to be a lot more transparent and less opaque when it comes to its complaints process and how it deals with these kind of things. And when it comes to political pressure on the BBC, I mean, this has happened as long as the BBC has existed. In 1926, Winston Churchill tried to take over the BBC during the general strike and was rebuffed by Lord Reith, the first Director General of the BBC. In the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher tried to successfully oust the Director General of the BBC. She didn't agree with them. Under Tony Blair, a former Labour Party donor was made the chairman of the BBC. It's because it's a sort of part of the state, you're always going to have this. And I think there's always going to be that political tension. And you can't get rid of that because it is ultimately still part of the British state. But it's about making sure there's enough safeguards and checks within that. If it succeeds or not, come back and ask me again in 2 years' time.
So, I mean, ITV News is very different, isn't it? And I suspect everyone's going to do edits a lot more carefully in the future.
Yeah, we had a meeting yesterday which said exactly the same. In
The news, isn't it, to take two bits of somebody speaking and stitch them together with a cutaway. So I think everyone's going to be...
So, in fact, we had a meeting yesterday, and as Nigel says, it's you have a news report that's maximum maybe 2.5 minutes long, and so you're grabbing out the soundbite that you want from the interview that you've done. Sometimes they might not say it in one mouthful, so you're like, oh well, I'll take that bit and that bit, and you'll put a cutaway, whether that be like the hand or take it from side on. Yesterday it was said we need to be more obvious about when we do that. So as simple as a white flash. Now, as a correspondent, when you do that, you don't really like the look of it because it doesn't make a nice, elegant piece of television. But all of these things are becoming more and more necessary so that you trust us. And I think that is probably one of the biggest things going forward now, because trust is paramount. If ITV doesn't have your trust, you're not going to watch and you're not going to listen to anything I've got to say. And I think that, verification, but show your workings out. Quite a lot of the time, our digital unit do this. They've done a story, they've interviewed somebody, and they show their workings out. They say, oh, or we got that wrong. I often think when you see politicians they muck things up and they don't say they're sorry and they don't do things, they don't hold their hands up. And I think that is what everybody needs to learn about what has happened over the last week. You come under increasing amounts of flack and criticism if you don't just hold your hands up and say, we made a mistake. And I think the panorama, it was a mistake. How that has then been taken, I feel is, I need to be careful maybe what I say, but ultimately that speech was 4 years ago. That was a long time. There is probably not a person who watched that Panorama programme who didn't know what Donald Trump said that day and what didn't happen as a result of that speech. So I think there were other, perhaps darker arts at play, but was it handled particularly brilliantly? Perhaps not, because I think it should have been an apology. It was a mistake quicker than it was. But overall, I think that a weakened BBC is not good for anyone, not good for the world, not good for journalism. And I've got no skin in this game. I've never worked for the BBC. But what it does as an organisation across the world, forget just us, is incredible.
Okay, well, thanks for bringing up the question in weeks. That was very important. I just want to ask one about artificial intelligence. So, I mean, there is a theory that actually AI could take over a whole tranche of journalism. So, Dispatches the other week did their first programme where they used an AI presenter, and I'm awfully sorry, Lucy.
That's all right. I'm a dying breed.
Exactly. People have done research that there's an increasing number of stories written by AI now. And AI is just going to get better and better. It's not going to get worse. It's going to get more accurate. So are you both using AI and are you fearful about the future? Sebastian, do you want to start on that?
I use AI for research, not writing purposes. So ChatGPT 5 has this deep research function, which I find incredibly useful when you're trying to dig up stats, clippings, whatever, or something. If I've thought of something or seen of something, but I can't remember where it is, and it does, it's very good for that. But I have to absolutely double, triple check. It still gets things very badly wrong. So I have to go back to the source. That'll be the same as you do for anything. I've never used it for writing. I wouldn't. It wouldn't. I mean, I think it would completely undermine what I do if you were just to say bang out Times editorial, and it would probably do a scarily good job. That way, I'm very depressed. But I think the reason I'm kind of a bit more optimistic about AI when it comes to written journalism is, number one, AI can't interview people. It might be able to do a facsimile of it, or people do it, but they can't interview people. And number two, AI still lacks the critical thinking about when you're making decisions. So when you're thinking about how to frame a story, how to do it, that is based on your years of experience, your reporting and oil skills. It's the same when it comes to written journalism. So when we're writing comment pieces and we're deciding what our view is, AI will do a fantastic on the one hand, on the other hand. That's not how it works in that basis. It will keep getting better. There will be more of it. I think wire news reporting will get a lot more automated for things like the Press Association and the Associated Press when it comes to that kind of thing. But I'm still hopeful that ultimately, if we are providing value that is worth people tuning in, that is worth people paying for, then people will still pay for it. Yeah. And as I said, that's one of the good things, that the Times has got more people reading it than ever before, because clearly we're doing something people want to go for. So semi-optimistic, but the big danger, of course, is disinformation and how that, and as I said, AI gets things wrong, and the role of deepfakes. And you've just got to be, it's a bit like your package editing, it's just got to be ultra vigilant on this stuff. I mean, the biggest misinformation thing that comes to mind that made it into the traditional media was Have I Got News For You did a clip about digital ID, and they said that Tony Blair's son, Ewan Blair, was behind it. completely made up, was not true in the slightest. But some young producer had seen it on Twitter that had been auto-generated and decided it was true. And that then went out to the 10 million people who watched Have I Got News for You, and obviously they had to apologise. So that's how you've got to just double check, triple check, and be very vigilant about it.
Are you using AI? And you haven't been replaced by AI?
I haven't yet. No. I'd like to see what she looked like though, if they modelled it on me. Going back actually, so your question earlier, being AI literate will be another one of those skills. It will become a necessity. Right now, I mean, there was a big, massive conference in Lisbon this week that lots of like kind of the big bosses of ITV and Sky and, you know, whether, I don't know if you look at the news movement or, you know, kind of those kind of organisations as well. And our CEO said essentially that what we are using it for at the moment is to enhance what we already do, to make it better. We're not using it to do things. So we use something called Casra, which transcribes. You know, an interview just goes into the system and it's transcribed and I can see immediately what it is. Whereas that normally used to take real time. So if that interview was 40 minutes longer, you're waiting for 40 minutes. You know, translation services, Euronews use it. Euronews use it for translation. Another thing that we use it for, like our digital team were going to have a brainstorming meeting, which would have taken the whole afternoon, about how they're going to approach the budget. What are the key issues for Gen Z? And I spoke to like the lead on the unit, and she said, I basically said, we are the ITV News digital unit. We want to cover the budget. Need ideas how to make it conversational but authoritative. Keep in line with ITV's values. Can you draw up a list of key issues we should be hitting for our Gen Z audience? And that would have taken a whole afternoon for that team to come up with. And there you go, the ideas. And they're right and they're relevant. And you've saved all that time. So I am cheered by the fact that it's going to make things easier, quicker, so I can crack on with what me as a human being is best at. But of course, there is the downside.
Yeah, I think the positive way of looking at it is I just think in this world of AI, misinformation, disinformation, that hopefully the positive way is that the trusted brands are going to become ever more important. The Times, ITV News, the BBC. And so in terms of journalism of the future, I think the important thing is that those brands are still there and still producing high quality journalism. And hopefully people will seek it out. Okay, exactly an hour, Tim. That's the
Zeal.
in TV News. That's what we always tell them.
We'll be crashing off there any second.
Let's make this TV. I've done all.
Exactly. So listen, thank you all very much for coming this evening on this rainy day. You'll be able to watch it again on our YouTube channel. But let me first of all just thank our two speakers for coming along tonight.